spoken about this issue of Abigail, your grandniece, on many occasions, no doubt. You're the author of Saving Abigail, the true story of the abduction and rescue of a 3-year-old host. And I welcome you to the Israel Connection, Liz.
Thank you.
Just for those who are not aware of the story behind your niece, do you want to just, in just a few words, tell us what happened and where you are where you are at today as regards this whole saga?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to join you. And my heart is with you and people in Australia. And the terror of October 7th lives on within me and within so many of us. But what happened on Bondi Beach on the first night of Hanukkah, is something that triggers back so many emotions in addition to the terror of what happened that day. And I just want to say that my thoughts and all the work I do and that so many of us are doing is also to support you in Australia. And so thank you for being a voice and for being a powerful voice in this world that we are living in. October 7th, I was in Israel and I was going back and forth to the safe room as everybody was that morning. And I had lived in Israel for many years and had family all over the country. But I have a very, very beautiful family living along the border of Gaza in Kfar Aza kibbutz. And that morning, when I started to hear that something was happening along the border, I started to call my sister-in-law, my niece, and nobody living in Kfar Aza was going to answer the phone that morning. But I didn't know it at the time, what was going on. And I called my sister-in-law and said to her, what's going on? And the first thing she said was that my niece, Madar, her husband, Roe, and their 3-year-old baby girl, Abigail, had been murdered that morning, about an hour before, by Hamas terrorists in their home in Kfar Aza. And so we learned about this because they had 3 children. Abigail was 3, Amalia 6, and Michael 9. And Michael and Amalia, 6 and 9 years old, were locked in a closet in a cupboard in their safe room in their house where their mother's body was laying next to them dead. And the 2 children told us what happened to them that morning. And just quickly, they were in their house and the terrorists came in. And my niece was putting the 3 kids in their safe room and she was murdered by these terrorists in front of these 3 children. Her husband, who was a photojournalist, Roe, had gone outside. He took photos for Ynet. And he had done this on many occasions. As we know, missiles came into Israel from Gaza, and he had gone out to take photos. But this morning, he realized it wasn't what we would call a normal missile attack, which was 1 or 2 missiles, but it was an invasion. And he actually captured terrorists paragliding into their kibbutz that morning. But he ran back and he went to find these 3 children running outside after their mother had been murdered. And he picked up little Abigail. They all started to run, and then he was murdered by the terrorists. And Michael and Amalia saw Abigail in his arms, and when he was murdered, they thought that she had been murdered also. And then they ran home, locked themselves in their closet, and that's where they spent 14 hours that day before they were rescued.
The protests have been running for 733 consecutive days in Hostage Square that came to an end as a ceasefire deal was announced 2 months ago, which has seen the return now of all the hostages bar one, with just the body of one deceased hostage, Run Gvili, remaining in Gaza. One of Israel's 3 demands in its war in Gaza, the release of all the hostages, has been achieved. Now, your grandniece, Abigail, was released less than 2 months after October the 7th. So why is it so important for people today to be listening in particular to Abigail's story?
Well, Abigail's story for me is a story that is very personal, and yet this is a story that reflects over 1,200 people murdered that day, her parents. I'm an American. Her mother, American, was murdered, one of over 47 Americans murdered that morning. And Abigail was one of 35 children under the age of 18 that were kidnapped and stolen into Gaza that morning. And so for myself and for so many of us, that this is a story of we don't give up, we are resilient, we fight, we keep fighting for every life. And as you said, we're still fighting for the deceased body of Ron Gvili, who was kidnapped that morning after saving many lives. And that's, I believe, who we are as Jewish people. And I believe that is who we should be as all humans, which is fighting for life. And so Abigail's story and why I believe it is an important one is, yes, it's important for the Jewish community. And I've traveled the world with this book, Saving Abigail, because I want people to know what happened to my family that morning and to Abigail and her brother and sister and other relatives that were also hiding, fighting and saving, fighting for their lives for over 24 hours that morning. But I think that it's really a story that we can share with people who are not part of the Jewish community or that are doubters or don't know the facts. Because when you talk about a 3-year-old child who's witnessed the murder of her parents and then is stolen into Gaza, it is a story that resonates with people, Jewish and not, about the terror and the horror of what happened that morning.
I think Hamas is aware of the way in which we Jews treat our lives as being so precious, and they have taken advantage of that, haven't they, in this war against Israel? If we go back to what happened with Gilad Shalit and his release, and how Israel saw his life as being of such great value, and in return gave over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in return for him. This comes back to bite us, doesn't it, Liz, in a sense?
Well, look, I think that the part that I keep going on is I want to talk about who we are as Jews and who we are as people. And I don't understand how anybody, any human being could come in and murder children. They murdered and burned and killed children that morning. How any group could come in and rape and mutilate and then steal dead bodies in addition to live ones and take them as hostages. So I don't understand how that works. But what I do understand is that the majority of people in Australia, the people in America, all over the world are good people, the majority. And so I talk to them and I do say, I don't understand. But I also understand that Israel needs to be strong and to survive. It's in a neighborhood of the world that is tough and rough. But I also want people to understand two things from this moment that I can speak clearly to. One, I know what it means to be Jewish and what it means to save lives. I know from the beginning of this hostage ordeal that while I and many other hostage families called for the release of Abigail and all the hostages and an end to the fighting, we also were calling for the support and the humanitarian aid for the children and women living in Gaza, because to us, we understood that this was about the hostages being released, but it was also about how do we as humans make sure that we are taking care of other people. But what I will also say, in addition to what you said about the disregard for human life, is that they were able to get people to believe them. They were able to get people to believe, even after seeing GoPro cameras of fellow terrorists stealing, killing, abusing bodies, they were still being able to get the hearts of people around the world to support them. And so when I speak to you today, my goal and my continuing goal, and I believe all of our goal, is not only to tell the truth of October 7th, but also to talk about the resilience and how we have been in this process of trying to fight for life. And we have a lot of allies. And that is who I want to talk about when I speak, which are people who are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and from all over the world that have actually come together and spoken out against the terrorists, spoken out against the terrorists that perpetrated the murder of all those beautiful people on Bondi Beach. There are more of us. So when you talk about it, like I can't get into that mindset, but what I can do is talk about that there are more of us that we have to work together to keep pushing for a resolution of security and safety for the Jewish people, for Israel, but for all of humanity.
So for you, it's crucial that we keep telling the stories of those who have been murdered and those who have returned home. And you say that we need to make sure that it's safe for the children of Israel, the children of the region, and the children of the world. Now, that's a very broad brush statement. So you have been a hostage advocate up to this point of time. So you see your role now as changing to be an advocate of a different kind.
Yeah, I mean, it's so we as Jews talk about tikkun ulam. We take care of the world. We've never said tikkun Yehudim. We don't say take care of Jews. And I know that before October 7th, I grew up in a family that was always about how do we take care of the world? How do we do better? And most of it was through Jewish organizations in America where I grew up. But it was the Jewish Family Service where we were making sure that Jews were taken care of socially and in LA and given food. But we were also providing food for families and people that were not Jewish. But what I've learned is that in this moment, we need to tell our stories. And I believe that we have not done that well as the Jewish people. We've been doing good things and we have been humble and trying to be respectful. But at this point, I think that one of the things, the messages that we've missed is telling the world who we are as people, tikkun ulam. And so I feel like my role now is, yes, to keep telling the stories of October 7th, because if we don't, then they become people can change the stories, they can change history. But for my niece and her husband who were murdered, I will keep being a voice so that their death, so their murder will not be in vain, but it will be used for a future and for a better world for Abigail. And yes, all the children. Because at the end of the day, there is no child. I mean, when Abigail was taken, people would look at me and say, just like you did, how could they do this to a child? And so, yes, there are people that can do this to a child, and they are doing it. But it is upon all of us to find that higher voice and to find that higher level of talking about what it is to fight for Abigail and for all these children. And so, yes, it's about fighting against anti Semitism, it's about fighting against hate, but it's also about telling the truth. And for me, that truth is what is the truth of how it happened in Australia on the first night of Hanukkah? And that is because there was so much hate that was being able to be perpetrated in the world and in Australia. You know, I was in Australia a few months ago. And one of the things I heard in my time in Sydney and in Melbourne, I spoke with students, I spoke with Jews, non Jews, people of all ages, races, was that even the non Jews saw that the Jews were in danger. Even the non Jews were speaking up, that were sitting there saying this anti Semitism is being perpetuated and the government isn't standing up for these people. And these people are feeling unsafe and they are unsafe on the streets. When you hear something like that, and this was before what happened a week ago, but when you hear that, I think it is upon all of us to fight and to be supportive because whether we live in Australia or in America or anywhere in the world, it is to make sure that those voices of hate do not get to be the last word. And so I know that right now, especially where you're coming from, and I've heard podcasts and I've been reaching out to people in your country, there is so much pain. But you also have so many people in the world that are there supporting you, Jews and non-Jews. And that is because we're telling stories. And you will be telling the stories of all these families and all these people, a little girl, a 10-year-old little girl, people who are Holocaust survivors that then were gunned down and murdered on their streets in a country where they came for safety and security and lived as good citizens. Those are the stories we need to tell. And I believe it is upon all of us. And it is for me sort of what I would say like is a calling now, which is to keep telling that truth because that truth has to be sent to everywhere across the world. And it is a truth that I believe will bring more people on our side and understanding what we're fighting for.
Do you think that the issue of the hostages that were held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad could have been better handled by Israeli authorities?
So I'll put on the side of, I'm not a politician. I'm not a military expert. I'm not an intelligence expert. But I know that those people that were stolen on October 7th could have come back. And people will argue with me and saying that, terrorism and Hamas, but there were opportunities. And I believe that they were missed opportunities. And yes, we had to give in to terrorists. But to save those lives, what I believe was the most important thing was do everything to bring back a child. And look, you and I both know that there were opportunities early on that were denied. But we also know there were opportunities that people in the Israeli Knesset voted against, leaders that are still there today, that voted against deals that would have brought Abigail and women and children home much, much earlier than 51 days when Abigail was finally released. And so, People always ask me, is the Israeli government doing enough? Was Prime Minister Netanyahu doing enough? And for all those months that I was out there, and even after Abigail was released, to this day, it is still something that is so important to bring home hostages. I would say until all the hostages are home, the Israeli government has not done enough. And look, I I love Israel. I want Israel to be safe and secure. But what I also know in this moment as we speak, we do need an investigation. We need an independent investigation to find out why Abigail's family was not protected. My niece and her husband spent 28 hours in a safe room with three children, a neighbor, and her infant 1 month old child. 28 hours cowering in fear. We know the story of the Nova Festival, young people dancing. We know so many things. And we also know who Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and what radical terrorism is. But what I also know is that we need to know how it was they were not protected in a country that promised to protect them. So this is a complicated story. But what I also believe is that for us to go forward, we do need to know where we failed in the government of Israel, so it does not happen again. And I go back to, if we do an independent investigation and we learn who was responsible, where the failures were, then also we are doing what we need to do, which is to make sure that Israel will continue to be safe and strong. I'll just add, I wrote this op-ed recently, which talks about, if you really love a nation, you're willing to go and fight for what it is. And that is to know the truth of where we failed. And so right now, I believe your question started with, could there have been opportunities and things done to bring home hostages earlier? And yes, there are. We could go into the nitty gritties, and we don't have that time today. But there were opportunities, and there were times when there was a friction between, do you get rid of Hamas or do you bring home the hostages? And for me, it was always, you bring home the hostages. Their lives are every day in danger. And we saw people whose lives were taken and lost in those days that should have been brought home, because Hamas is a terror organization and they have to be eradicated. But that was something that we knew would take longer, and that wasn't something that was specifically about saving our Jewish lives. It goes back to your question in the beginning, or your statement of the value that we hold for each independent life. And so I do think there were missed opportunities, and what I would hope is that there will be an independent investigation to know what the failures were, to review what happened over 2 years of how we did not get these people back to save more lives. But that would be so that the future of Israel will be safer and stronger.
Now, from a political perspective, you are a Democrat, but you seem to convey the impression through your book that you got more support for your cause from the Republican side. How do you come to terms with that? I mean, one person in particular who helped you a great deal was Senator Collins, right? That's who was a Republican.
Yeah. Look, I've learned, first, I'll be honest. Yes, I'm a Democrat. As I was growing up, I was a Democrat. But I'll tell you, David, on October 7th, I woke up and I was like, I'm an American. And what I realized was that we needed to talk to both sides. And for me, the talking to both sides started earlier because I had started a podcast about how do we talk to our elected leaders about heart and humanity? How do we talk to our leaders, whether they're far right, far left, Jewish or not? How do we talk to them about heart and humanity to make these people real? And then October 7th happened. And all of a sudden, I'm in this arena with Democrats, Republicans, people for the evangelical Christian community, Jewish community, Muslim community, Black, Latino, LGBTQ, everything that was diverse about America. And what I understood was that we had to sit in rooms and have some tough conversations, or sit in rooms with people that we may not have thought were our allies. And as you know, we have found unexpected allies in the last few years. But we also have been disappointed by people we thought were our allies. But I will say overall, there were a lot of Democrats and Republicans that were supportive of the hostages and really listening and meeting with hundreds of families. Think about it. They were coming from Israel and meeting with the US government with Democrats, with Republicans. They were not picking one side or the other. Yes, we had the Biden administration, and President Biden and his team were meeting with our families, but it was Democrats and Republicans pushing together and working with the Biden administration. And the Susan Collins story, which I write about in Saving Abigail, is a beautiful story. because here I was the first day, and it was about a week and a half after October 7th. I was one of the first people to get to DC. And this evangelical Christian woman brings me and another family to meet with Republican women senators. These are six of the most highest level women leaders in America, people I did not know. And what I knew was when I told them the story of Abigail, you saw these women, they were just crying. They were just horrified. We had just learned that Abigail had actually survived because her body was nowhere to be found after they cleared the kibbutz. But what we learned was she was a hostage. And so what I did was I took this picture of Abigail and I showed these women leaders, this beautiful 3-year-old child, explaining what she had been going through that morning after seeing her parents murdered, and then finally getting to a safe place and being taken as a hostage. And Susan Collins came up to me after that meeting, still tears in her blue eyes, and held my hands and said, I'm going to do everything I can to bring home this child. And I gave her and all the leaders very early on this photo. She was in Israel 3 days later with a Kodel, Democrats and Republican leaders going to Israel to meet with the Israelis to show support. And she showed this picture. She carried this picture with her. And how do I know? My daughter Noah went to this meeting and brought this picture and wanted to give it to Susan Collins. And Susan Collins said, I've got this picture. And she pulled it out from her purse and said, I'm going to do everything I can to bring home your cousin. And then a few hours later at the news conference, the international news conference, Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, brave, powerful, incredibly driven by humanity, this leader showed the world what a hostage looked like, what an innocent child stolen by Hamas terrorists. And she was very clear on what terrorists were and how despicable what they did was, but her focus was bringing home Abigail and 250 hostages. So when you ask that question, what I really like to tell people is that we did have Democrats and Republicans, people from both sides. And to this day, even with what we hear about the left and the right and what they may be or not against for Israel or the Jewish people, the truth is that the majority of our leaders in America support the hostage release. They work against anti-Semitism. They work to support Israel, and they do it in a bipartisan manner.
Yeah, well, you referred to the majority. Of course, there was one person that you did speak to with whom you didn't get very far. That's I'm talking about Rashida Tlaib, who
Yeah.
expressed no real sympathy when you spoke to her.
I will say something, which is people asked me early on in the press, like when they would see and you know this, the pictures they put of hostages and they would tear them down or deface them. And they do that to a 3-year-old child. And people would say, well, what is your reaction? And I would react like, those people are uneducated. They're not kind. They don't have a heart. But I have to focus on the people that are with us. Who wants to help support these, by the way, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist. These were Hindus. These were people from all over the world that were kidnapped, in addition to the ones who were already murdered. And so what I felt was, and David, you'll understand this, which is like, who do you talk with? And we had gone into Rashida Tlaib's office on a Thursday because I was going to DC every week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when the congressional leaders were there. And we met with her office, and they said that we explained what the purpose was, and they said that they would reach out to her. And a few hours later, Thursday afternoon, we get a call saying she'd like to meet with you on Tuesday morning. I said, great. She's a mother. This woman, like, I'm going to connect with anyone who wants to hear about the story. And over the weekend, she did tweet something, and one of her statements was, from the river to the sea. And we may not all agree on a lot of things, but I knew back then, and I know today, from the river to the sea, which you all know in Australia, is a call for the destruction of the Jewish people. I'm not going to argue with people that say it's just a statement. It's like yelling fire in a movie theater. And in America, if you yell fire in a movie theater, that is an offense. You can be arrested and you don't just get away with that kind of freedom of speech. And from the river to the sea, to me, falls into that place, which is your calling for the destruction, for the death, and for the killing. And so I back then said to myself, there are 535 congressional leaders, 435 in the Congress and the House, 100 in the Senate. There's a lot of people to meet with. I cannot put myself in a room with somebody who can actually declare from the river to the sea because I knew what it meant. And so, as opposed to being negative and hateful, I just pushed that aside. I made it clear. I wrote about it in the book because I wanted the book to be honest. I wanted the book to tell the truth of October 7th. And if you read it, I'm very clear about who was supportive and who wasn't. But what I also understood was there were a lot of people that were there to support us. And so I figured that was an example of somebody that wasn't, an example of a hate statement, which now we see and people cannot argue is a declaration of hate and the need to get rid of the Jewish people. And so here I am, and yes, it's in the book, but I still stand very strong to why I did not meet with her that morning.
Here in Australia now, we have another statement, the global intifada, that is being pronounced on the streets, and it's going to be made a statement of hate that could be made illegal. But before that's happening, the people who express these kinds of views are saying it freely on the streets while they have the opportunity. It's pretty ghoulish to see how they're doing that so soon after Bondi, the Bondi massacre. Uh, I want to get to. I want to give you the opportunity to tell us about the availability of your book. I got an Audible book version, which was something I listened to as I dozed off on many nights. I've listened to probably 50, 60% of it. It's an extraordinary experience to do it that way, with your voice echoing the words that you've written in the book version. Uh, you can't get a Kindle version in Australia. I found that out because that's what your media person who organised this interview was trying to provide me with. But no doubt Amazon is the place to go to get a copy of the book, and it's certainly a very important book to read. And I've got another book alongside me, which I'm going to put up here, which I think you can see. Maybe can you see
I
it?
can't. No.
No, it's Hostage by Eli Sharabi, and if anybody's going to read any two books that convey what has happened with the hostages, your book and Eli Sharabi's are perfect choices, I think.
Yeah. Look, when I wrote the book, my goal was to put down in writing um, the truth of October 7th. And, I'll just show here, which is this is the book Saving Abigail. And I really wrote this because there were so many people that were involved in saving Abigail. And it was something that for me was a way to share and to think and to appreciate so that people in the world could see that bringing home Abigail and bringing home all the hostages, even to this day, has taken everybody showing up in rallies, showing up around the world to bring home Abigail and now to bring home all but one hostage, Ron Veely, as we speak. And I hope when people are listening to this that his body has been returned to his family. Um, Eli Sharabi's book, Hostages, is an important read, an important listen. He really talks about the horrors of what happened to him for over 500 days as a hostage. The more books and the more stories that are told, I believe, is very important. Abigail's story, and the reason why I think it is a very important book for Jews and non-Jews, is because, and when you think of Anne Frank, and people have read it and they understand what happened during the Holocaust because it's the life of a child. This is the life of a child. This is a child who did survive, but for the rest of her life will be traumatized. But what we also see in this book is hope, and a hope for a way that we can keep working together and keep telling her story as a story that will not let this happen again. So I will just give you a quick thing, which is I have a friend, and she said, I bought the book, I put it on my table by my front door, and whether I'm have somebody coming over or I'm going somewhere, I bring this book to Jews and non-Jews because what I understood is this is a story that people need to hear. I mean, people can listen to our podcast here or they can hear me when I speak, but there's only so much. But when they see a book or they hear a book like you said, it resonates. So Right now, I agree with you. I think that Saving Abigail is a book that is telling a story people need to hear. And if people are listening and they say, we already know these stories, I tell people the way you can help, because they're like, what can we do at this point? Is tell the story. And if you can share this book or share Saving Abigail or save it or Ellie Sharabi's book, you are actually helping because this world right now needs what we call hasbara explanations. And the explanations are through literature at this moment. And there's some great important movies and shows that are coming out. But for right now, the most important is for us to not let anybody walk another day with any denial or any lack of knowledge of October 7th. So I was in Australia and people could buy at that time Saving Abigail on Amazon Australia. If you want to hear it, I do say it and I speak it. And I hope that you will not doze off and you'll listen to the last 40% because I think it's important. But it's also available on Kindle. But it is truly a way for people who say, I want to know what I can do to help, tell the stories and tell the stories by giving this. Give it to people in your offices, give it to people that are not Jewish, but that people that need to hear. It's an easy read in the sense that it's only 200 pages, but it is an emotional, difficult read because it tells a true story of horror. And so, for me at this point, I always wanted to help the world, but on October 7th, I woke up and I needed help from the world. And now, as we're speaking, and Abigail has just had her sixth birthday, and she just celebrated her sixth birthday. Her fourth birthday was as a hostage in Gaza. But what I say is like, how does every year for Abigail become a year where she can grow and make incredible memories and live what we would like for all of our children, which is a beautiful life? Part of it is being there to support her story and make sure that the world knows it so it doesn't happen again, but yet it honors what she went through, what her brother and sister went through, and what their parents went through, and the fact they're not here. I'll just quickly say this. When I met Susan Collins and so many of the leaders, I said, I'm her auntie, but her parents are gone. We need everybody to be her auntie. We need you all to be advocates and support her. And so be her aunts and her uncles. And what I say to people around the world right now is be Abigail's aunts and uncles. Be Abigail's voice. Be the voice of those who do not have that voice anymore, her parents. And that is telling the story of October 7th. And so, I'm just a simple person that woke up and had to figure out how to go and do something. And it is exhausting work. Every night I go to bed and I'm like, ugh, I'm exhausted. I can't believe there's not, there, more can I do? And then I wake up the next morning and I start again. And it's everyday life that we live and what you do every day by telling stories on your podcast, which is so, so vital. Yes, for the Jewish people in Australia and in the diaspora, but supporting our family and our friends in Israel and really telling a story that is very human. And, you said one thing, which was this concept of the global intifada. Global intifada, if you think about it, it is against anybody that is different. It is against anybody that does not believe in a radical Islamic life. So anybody that does not believe in an Islamic radical life throughout the world should be working with us to fight it and to make sure that those words are not allowed to be said on any street, in any country, in any place in this world.
Well, Liz Hirsh Naftali, you are a magnificent spokesperson for your book and for the cause that we've been talking about today. I thank you so much for speaking to us and getting your message across to my audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and please, please be strong. And I'm sending my love and all my support to you and your communities. And we're in this together. And I know that it feels sometimes that we're alone wherever we are in the world, but I know that we are all in this together.
Great. Thanks, Liz. I don't know how many interviews you've done, but I think if you keep it up at this rate, it's an extraordinary effort that you've made to keep doing it. It's
Thank you very
great,
much.
really, really sensational.
Thank you. And really stay strong and keep doing your amazing work.
Yeah, well, we're all in it together, aren't we? That's
Yeah.
that's what we've discovered.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Take good care. Have a good day with the rest of your work.